Okay, so thank you so much for coming to the online Causal Inference seminars. Today, we're really excited to have another great speaker, Tianchen Qian from University of California, Irvine. And he's going to talking about interesting papers about causal inference and machine learning in mobile health, modeling the time-varying effects using longitudinal functional data. And he has his collaborators, Jiaxin Yu, in the Q&A session. And we're going to have discussion from Walter Dempsey from University of Michigan at the end of the talk. So, and Sarah is going to today handle the questions. So, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Naoki. So I just wanted to remind you to please use the question. So use the Q&A function to submit the questions and not the chat, so that we can keep track of what's happening. And Yashin, about the pronunciation, can try to answer them already. And so if there are some questions which are still interesting to discuss at the end, I will read them out or potentially unmute you if you really want to. And then we can discuss them with Tianchen at the end. So that's great. So I'll let Tianchen start. Slowly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I've been following this seminar series since the very first one in 2020, and it was truly a highlight for me to academically during quarantine and remote times to have this seminar around. In theater, there's a saying that the show must go on, which means that no matter what the challenges are, the performance continues. This seminar series has embodied that spirit and carried on for over 4 years now, and providing such a valuable space for connecting and learning. It's really impressive, and I'm very grateful to be part of it today. So today, let's start by talking about the exciting world of mobile health interventions. On this slide, you see 3 great examples: promoting physical activity, reducing drinking, and helping people to quit smoking. These interventions are like personal cheerleaders in your pocket, right? Nudging you towards healthier habits. Sounds amazing. But now, let me show you what real life looks like. Suddenly, it feels less like a helpful coach and more like a chaotic group chat that never stops buzzing. Notifications everywhere. And at this point, you'd need an intervention to escape the interventions. So that's why designing these interventions thoughtfully is very important. Balancing the effectiveness while keeping users sane. So today, I'll dive into how our research is tackling this challenge. So here's the plan for today. We'll first review a mobile health study and its findings. Then we'll identify some knowledge gaps that are unanswered in these previous studies. And to answer these questions, we'll propose a new method. And towards the end, we'll apply the methods to the study to gain new insights for improving the mobile health intervention. So the study is called the HeartSteps. It's a micro-randomized trial. We'll go into the details of what that means shortly. And the goal of the study is to develop smartphone prompts for physical activity. So here are some examples. One of the prompts would look like this. It's a push notification on your phone. It says, how about taking a few minutes to enjoy nature? And it's suggesting a brief walking activity. Here's another type of these prompts. It says, at desk, stretch your feet. So this is suggesting a stretching exercise. And in that study, people call that anti-sedentary suggestion. Now, these are just examples. In the actual study, there are a whole bunch of different types of these messages with different contents, so that the person in the study won't feel repetitive. And here is the data collected from this study. So there are 37 participants in the study, each in the study for 42 days. And each participant is randomized 5 times a day. So you see that in total, there will be 210 randomizations within the same person. And that's why this is called a micro-randomized trial. So I'll use J here to denote the so-called decision point. which is a randomization point, essentially. So we have 210 decision points for each person. For the jth decision point, for a generic person, we observe their covariates in location, the weather of the day, their motion, past physical activity, etc. Then a randomization occurs. So with probability 0.6, that person will receive a push notification, one of the messages shown on the previous slide. With probability 0.4, they will receive nothing. So the phone won't bother them. After that, we observe some outcome from that person. In this case, the outcome is their minute level step count. You see here, this is the minute by minute step count up to 60 minutes. And the goal is, or the hope is that by sending these notifications, we increase their step count. So that was the data structure for one decision point. But as I said earlier, each individual is in the study for 210 decision points, 42 times 5. And this would be what the data looks like for a single person. I'm omitting subscript I. So this is for a generic individual. Right? We'll concatenate this for 210 times. So with that data, this is the previous finding in the literature. So first, the study found that there was a positive effect of these push notifications over the next 30-minute window. In other words, delivering a suggestion increased the 30-minute step count by around 14%. So about 35 additional steps over the 253 steps average. Another finding was that there was diminishing effect over the days in the study. So originally, around the first week in the study, delivering a suggestion increased the step count by a lot. But around mid-study, maybe 3 weeks in, the effect almost disappeared. That's as expected, right? As you receive more and more of these interventions, you kind of get used to them. So people start to respond less. So these were the findings, but there are some unanswered questions. The first one was, why 30-minute step count? Well, originally, when the researchers was designing the study, they pre-specified this outcome window, 30 minutes, because they thought, we don't want it to be too long so that too much noise will come in, but we don't want it to be too short because otherwise people won't have the time to react on the interventions. So they thought 30 minutes was the right choice. But was that actually the right choice? Or should we look at 40 minutes or 60 minutes? Another question is about the finer time scale. So the previous study found that the causal effect, the effect of the intervention, decreases over days in the study. But how about the effect of the intervention within a smaller time window, like within the 60 minutes? How soon do people start to react to these interventions? Do we know anything about that? Well, the data certainly contains such information, but there weren't any available methodology to answer this question. So that's what we're going to tackle as well. So now I'm going to start formulating the problem in a statistical way. Remember, this is the data structure for one person at a decision point. And this is the data for a person over the course of the study. Here I'm using thick arrows to represent all the arrows from the left nodes to the right nodes so that I don't need to be crazy about all the different arrows. And the statistical or the causal question here is that how can we model the time varying effect of the intervention message, these AJs, on the minute by minute step count, the YJs. Here, each YJ represents a curve, something look like this. So how do we do that? There are a few challenges when we try to answer this question. The first challenge is the numerous treatment occasions. So the longitudinal data that we have here is very long, and there are many, many treatments during the study. In this talk, the study we focus on, we have 210 time points and 210 possible interventions. This is the scale for some of the other micro-randomized trials in the field. And you see that the number of time points is always in the hundreds or even more. So how to even define the causal effect in this case? The second challenge is the longitudinal functional aspect of the data. So we have longitudinal data over the course of the study, and each outcome in that longitudinal data is a functional. So this is what the data looks like as a reminder. We have a functional for decision point j minus 1, another functional for decision point j, yet another functional. Right. And some of you might disagree that this is not a functional data. So if you will, we can also view this as a nested longitudinal data. We have a mini longitudinal trajectory within a big longitudinal data set. So how to handle this type of data structure? The third challenge is about the high dimensional history information. This is what I mean. So suppose we're interested in understanding the causal effect of AJ on the subsequent outcome YJ. Now, we have all these past information, which I'll call HJ, the history information right before AJ. Well, we have all this past information that can tell us something about YJ. So these are covariate in that case. And we want to adjust for covariates to improve efficiency. But on the other hand, we don't want to, requiring the method to correctly model the relationship between the age and the outcome, because that's too many variables and it's impossible to correctly model the relationship. So how do we utilize the history data in a more robust way? To answer these three challenges, we draw insights from the literature in causal inference. To address the first challenge of the fact that we have many, many time points, we draw insights from the literature of causal excursion effect, which defined causal effects for these micro-randomized trials, but for simpler outcomes, continuous or binary. To address challenge number 2, we draw insights from functional data analysis, where people fit functions using non-parametric models, and we'll do similar things. To address challenge number 3, we draw insights from the machine learning literature in causal inference. Machine learning has been used to model nuisance parameters, to model effect heterogeneity, to model the effect of a continuous treatment. And we will use machine learning in a similar flavor. So next, let's delve into the definition of the causal effect. This is the notation we're going to use. X are the covariates, time-varying covariates at decision point J for a generic individual. A here is the randomized treatment. So for simplicity, we consider 0-1 treatment. It easily generalizes to categorical. And towards the end of the study, this talk, we'll see categorical A and the effect of different active treatments. So I'll use this Pj of Hj to denote the randomization probability of Aj equal to 1, given the history information at that time. In the study we were looking at, the randomization probability is always 0.6. That's a constant. But the methodology we develop handles more general cases where the randomization probability can depend on the history, like whether it's a weekday or weekend, maybe you want to send push notifications with different frequency. And finally, we use Yj to denote the outcome. I view that as a functional outcome, or a longitudinal vector, right? So we have Yj1 up to Yj capital T. And here in this analysis, we consider T equal to 60. So minute level step counts up to 60 minutes following a decision point. Then we define the potential outcomes. So we use Aj bar to denote the sequence of Ajs up to time little j. Each of these is a binary. So these are the potential outcomes. Right? For the outcome after decision point j, we can have a sequence of various types of treatment trajectories. And the traditional causal effect often focus on contrasts like this. So for two treatment trajectories, fixed treatment trajectories, we may consider a additive causal effect. Right? Now, in marginal structural models or structural nested mean models, these more classical causal inference models for longitudinal treatments, sometimes the causal effect differs from what I've shown here, but they are in a similar flavor. And the key part is that they always consider fixed treatment trajectories. But for our problem, we have too many possible treatment trajectories because we have a lot of time points where treatment can be assigned. So if we make models like this without very strong parametric assumptions, we don't have enough data to estimate all these parameters. So what we do is to define a causal excursion effect, and I'll tell you why that name. So this is what the effect looks like. It's a contrast between these two potential outcomes indexed by treatment trajectories. What are they? So this is the difference in the expected outcome. Here I'm focusing on the single minute for simplicity under two treatment policies. The blue one is to follow the micro-randomized trial policy, how the treatment is randomly assigned in the study, then assign a j equal to 1 deterministically. The red one is to follow the micro-randomized trial policy until time j minus 1, then at that most recent decision point, assign a equal to 1 deterministically. So this is the contrast. Here, the previous aj minus 1 bars are capital letters, so they are random. And when we take expectation, we're averaging them over whatever the randomization probability was in the micro-randomized trial, however the data was collected. And here, this Sj variable represents possible effect modifiers. We can set them to location, to whether the day is weekday, or what have you. Right? The Sj will be the choice of the researcher, and they don't have to capture all the possible effect modifiers. Just like in everyday causal inference, when you look at conditional treatment effects, if you don't include all your covariates, then you're averaging over other effect modifiers. And here's the expectation. It averages over everything except for Sj. So all the history information, including the past A's, but also the randomness in the outcome. So why this is called a excursion effect? When I look up the word excursion, it means a deviation from a regular pattern or path. And in this case, the regular pattern or path is how the how the treatment assignment was randomized in the study. So the MRT policy. I want to further illustrate this idea of causal excursion effect because this is relatively new. So here let's consider a case where j equal to 3, and let's ignore the fact that we have launched a functional outcome. Let's just imagine we have a single numeric outcome. In the study, people get randomized to different treatments, right? The first person received 1, 0, 1. And there are other people who receive different treatments, different treatment trajectories. So when we look at this contrast, right, we're focusing on those receiving a equal to 1, a3 equal to 1, and those receiving a3 equal to 0. So here when I designed this illustration, I sorted the individuals so that a3 equal to 1 is always here and a3 equal to 0 is always there. Then, if we take an average of all these individuals, we still get a3 equal to 1, but for the first two treatments, we get a mix of 1s and 0s. So these are represented as rainbow colors. And the average of all these outcomes is this expectation, where we have the past treatments as random and the last treatment deterministic, a3 equal to 1. Similarly, we have the average of these individuals where their past treatments are random and A3 is deterministically 0. Okay, so the rainbow-colored treatment assignments, they were the MRT policy. That's how the data was collected, people receiving randomized treatments. And for the A3, these two are deterministic. These are excursions from the micro-randomized trial policy. And that's why this contrast between these two averaged outcomes is understood as the causal excursion effect. And you see here very clearly that indeed they marginalize this effect, marginalize over the past treatment assignment. Okay, so going back to the definition, why do we consider this? Well, there are a couple of reasons. The first reason is that here it will boil down to very few parameters by averaging over the past treatments. And having very few parameters, having a marginal estimate is appealing to domain scientists. This is similar to when you analyze an RCT, you want to get an average effect first, then get deeper to look at the conditional and the effect modifications. So we want to provide similar marginal estimates. Now, this marginal estimate, it averages over the past treatment distribution. So it depends on how the treatment is assigned in the past. Some might say this is a problem because how can your treatment effect depends on the randomization probability? But I would argue that this actually is a desirable feature. It's a feature instead of a bug. Because imagine the past treatment assignment probability as a proxy for the burden on the individual. Then we have this causal effect to depend on the past treatment assignment probability. That means this causal effect reflects the burden level the participants have been receiving up to this time. And at the beginning of the study, we mentioned how burden is a very important topic. Another reason to define causal effect this way is, of course, to enable more efficient use of the data, because then we can reduce the parameter to only a few so that the data can be more efficiently used to estimate these parameters. So I would say that this handles challenge number 1, that we have numerous treatment occasions. We handle that by defining causal effect in this particular way. I call that tau of J, T, and S. J is the decision point index, T is the minute after that decision point, and S is the value of a possible effect modifier. This effect modifier can be time varying. So with the causal effects defined, the next step is to identify. And the identification is nothing special. We assume some standard causal assumptions, Sutva, positivity, and sequential ignorability. Then you get something very familiar to those of you who know the standardization equation. This is essentially standardization, iterated expectations. And here in these studies, in these micro-randomized trials, these assumptions easily hold because the treatments were indeed randomized. So then the next question is, how do we model this identified causal effect using observed data? How do we model and estimate them? So that's our next topic. So this is our causal effect. Let's first see some examples to motivate the more general model. If we want a marginal effect, if we don't care about any effect modification, let's just set ST to be the empty set. Then tau depends on 2 indices, and perhaps we'll put some functions on the indices. Then in this case, beta 1 of J denotes how the effect varies over the decision points over the course of the study. And beta 2 represents how the effect varies within a time window, within the minutes in that 60-minute window following each decision point. Right? And note the additive feature of this model. We could have generalized this to, including interaction terms too, but we didn't for simplicity. Now, if we want effect moderation, say location, then we can set Sj to be the location of that individual. Again, this is real time, so this is time varying location indexed by J. Then a model of the causal effect may look like this. And here we have the slope term for the location variable. And these are the varying coefficient terms in the literature, in varying coefficient models. So we borrow that idea to model these causal excursion effects. More generally, this is what the model looks like. So this is a very coefficient additive model with 2 time indices on the causal excursion effect. We have these f functions of Sj, and we will pre-construct these features. So these are predetermined vectors. And the first part is the time-fixed causal effect. This part is how the causal effect varies with decision points and moderated by this f1 of Sj. This part captures how the causal effect varies with the minutes. So the next question with this model is, how do we estimate these quantities? What we do is that we approximate these functions using B-splines. That's commonly done in functional data analysis or varying coefficient models. So we can write these betas as expansions of B-spline bases and the coefficients for these bases. And technically, we expand each, all these betas are vectors. So we expand each element of the vectors and estimate the parameters separately. So by building this model with 2 time indices, we solve the challenge of longitudinal functional data. We have 1 time index for this longitudinal aspect, another time index for the functional aspect. The next step is to construct an estimator. So with this model, right, these are the parameters we want to estimate. So we'll describe a 2-stage estimator. In the first stage, we estimate the nuisance parameter. And this is the nuisance parameter. So the expected value of some outcome conditional on the history information. This is your familiar outcome regression in any doubly robust estimators, right? Except here we're dealing with more complicated data structure. So it turns out that this nuisance parameter can be fitted using any supervised learning algorithms, linear regression, generalized linear models, splines, ensemble learning, what have you. There is no rate requirement on this nuisance parameter convergence. It does not require the model to converge to the truth at a certain convergence rate. And it turns out we don't require this nuisance parameter to converge to the truth at all. It can converge to anything. And we'll discuss more on that. But in practice, when building this model, we often pull across or add structure over different J's and different T's so that we don't use up all the degrees of freedom. The second stage, with the nuisance parameter estimated, is to minimize a weighted and centered least squares criterion. So here we have the estimated nuisance parameter. This is the causal excursion effect with the betas approximated using spline expansions. And here we have a centered treatment. And I'll tell you what this P tilde means. So just by looking at this weighted centered least squares criteria, right, we have the weight over here, which I'll explain. It's reasonable to believe this is a good criteria to minimize because this difference seems to have mean zero, at least when the model is correctly specified. And this part, if something is centered, they should have mean zero as well. Now, what's the weight? The weight is the stabilized inverse probability weight. So the denominator is the actual randomization probability, and the numerator is some numerator probability similar to stabilized IPW. This is to improve efficiency, and we allow it to depend on Sj. So this is something that you can fit by yourself. Okay, now moving on to some theoretical results. we establish the rate of convergence. Assuming the number of spline knots does not increase too quickly, then the betas converge in L2 norm at this rate, where this rho n squared denotes the difference between the spline space and the true parameter space, true parameter functional. Here, you see that we're getting slower convergence rate than parametric rate because we're using splines with a Kn at the top. And if we use cubic splines and beta is smooth enough, then we achieve some kind of optimal rate in the spline literature. And very importantly, this result tells us that the estimator converges and they're robust against misspecified nuisance model. So this rate of convergence result does not require this regression model to actually converge to the truth. It can be anything. And the source of robustness is due to the combination of using a stabilized IPW in the treatment centering. So this term in the criteria and this term in the criteria, they work together so that when we take the expectation of the derivative of this quantity, things cancel out, that this term no longer needs to be correct. Or one might say that by using this term and the weights, we orthogonalize the estimation for the betas and this nuisance parameter. So by having this robustness in the estimator, we argue that we solve the challenge number 3, which is high dimensional history information. Right? We can use that information to improve efficiency without requiring this nuisance model to be correctly specified. And lastly, to construct confidence intervals, we empirically verified that the common sandwich variance estimator from z-estimator theory yields good confidence interval coverage. But the theoretical asymptotic variance, when the number of knots increases with sample size, that's still a work in progress. Then, towards the end of this talk, I want to briefly show you some simulation results and then apply the methods to our original data set. So here is one of the simulation setups that I'm going to show you. This is the generative model. We have all the baseline part or the control part, right, where the treatment is assigned to 0. Y would be generated from this mean. So we have functions of J and T. We have effect not moderation, but rather interaction, or the time varying impact of the covariates on the outcome. Then we have the causal effect part, things that interact with the treatment assignment. And here xj is a effect moderator. So suppose we're interested in estimating the causal effect moderated by xj. With a very simple calculation, you can show that this causal excursion effect actually equals the term inside here. So the goal is to estimate these 3 parameters. We tried different forms for these parameters. Here, a multimodal functional, we call that a complex form, and a unimodal is a simple form. And finally, to verify the robustness, we intentionally misspecified the nuisance parameter by ignoring zj in fitting the regression model. Right, so this is the true regression model, but we ignored zj. And here is the simulation result. The top graph represents complex truth, complex functionals for the truth, and the bottom graph represents simple functionals for the truth. To the left are the coverage probability for these 3 functions. And we see that although sometimes we're slightly under coveraging, most of the time we're good. Right? We're up very close to 95%, the nominal coverage rate. And to the right, this shows the selected number of dots. We actually devised a cross-validation based criteria to select the number of dots for each of these functions for the B-spline basis. And here what we see is that when the true betas are complex, the number of knots are larger, the number of selected knots. And where the betas are simple, the number of selected nodes are fewer. So that matches with our intuition as well. And finally, I want to show you the analysis result once we apply the developed method to the HeartSteps dataset. So recall that this was the data structure, this was the trial, where everyone is randomized many, many times throughout the study, and we observe their step count. And the question was, what's the effect of these push notifications on the step count if we look at the fine scale of minute level step counts? So what we end up doing is that we use a log transformation for the minute level step count because a lot of them are zeros. And by taking the log, we add 0.5 to the zeros. By taking the log, we make the data less skewed. But this is not a necessary step for the methodology to work. So what is the effect? First, we look at the marginal effect. We set Sj to be the empty set. And this is the model. So this is the causal effect surface. This axis represents minutes. This axis represents the decision points. So this is T from 0 to 60. This is J from 0 to 210. And then we have the magnitude of the causal effect. And in this data analysis, we actually separated out the two types of active treatments, walking suggestions, and then bottom will show you anti-sedentary suggestions. So let's take a slice from this surface and see what the causal effect looks like. So this is the causal effect against the decision points, so days in the study. And we see that at the beginning, there is a positive effect, but indeed, very shortly, even before the halfway in the study, the effect covers 0. The confidence interval covers 0. Here's another slice in a different direction, where we look at the causal effect against minutes, 60 minutes, and we see that the causal effect is more or less positive for the first, say, 40-ish minutes. But then there's an upward trend, again, closer to the 60-minute. This might be due to the fact that we're using splice, and this causes some kind of boundary issues. So it could be an artifact. Here is the analysis result for the other type of suggestions, the anti-sedentary suggestions, which recommend you to stretch instead of taking a walk. And we see pretty similar results qualitatively. The anti-sedentary suggestion, the effect decreases very quickly at the beginning of the study to reach 0. And over the 60 minutes following a decision point, the causal effect is positive at the beginning, then becomes 0 later on in the window. But this result tells us that maybe the effect or the positive effect window, maybe it's not 30 minutes. It could be 40 minutes or maybe more, but that's not very plausible. We also looked at effect moderation analysis by assessing how does the effectiveness change based on whether the day is a weekday or a weekend. So we have all these different terms. And instead of showing you the surface, I'll just show you the sections. And in particular, I'm showing you the sections over minutes, over the 60 minutes. So the top are the walking suggestions, the bottom are the anti-sedentary suggestions. The left two panels represent when the day is a weekday, and the right, weekend. So we see that when the day is a weekday, we have some positive effects for both the walking suggestions and the anti-sedentary suggestions. And when the day is a weekend, no suggestions. So this might indicate that weekdays are better times to send these notifications, but weekends, people's schedule are too unpredictable so that these push notifications no longer make sense. And maybe we need to design alternative interventions on weekends so that they can encourage people to walk in their different schedules. Another takeaway from this plot is that the walking suggestions seem to have a longer effective time window compared to the anti-sedentary suggestions. And that's also expected because the walking suggestion directly asks people to walk, and the anti-sedentary suggestion simply asks people to stretch. Would the stretching lead to taking a walk? Possibly, but from this data analysis, it does not necessarily lead to a walking activity compared to the straightforward walking suggestions. Right? So this may indicate that if the goal is to encourage walking, then the anti-sedentary suggestions are not working as well. But on the other hand, if the goal is to encourage stretching, then the minute level step count is not the right outcome for these anti-sedentary suggestions. And we may need some other type of outcomes measured by sensor, for example. So to summarize, we developed a method for assessing causal effect using longitudinal functional data in mobile health. We tackled these three challenges. For the first challenge, we used a marginal causal excursion effect definition to handle the fact that we have many, many treatment occasions. For the second challenge, we developed a double index varying coefficient model. And for the third challenge, we developed a robust two-stage estimator and we can use flexible machine learning algorithms to estimate the nuisance parameter. When we applied the methods to HeartSteps, we obtained some new insights. Like, how soon does the effect take place? Well, the effect window seems to be between 10 and 40 minutes, and walking suggestions may have a wider effect window. And how does the effect change over time? Well, the effect declines over decision points, and also the decline is very fast at the beginning of the study. And finally, how does the effect depend on contextual information? We see that there's a larger effect on weekdays. And another analysis that I didn't show you tells us that the effect is also larger when someone has been sedentary for a while. So these informations help to inform the next iteration of these intervention design. And that's all I have, and I would love to hear what Walter has to say about this work.
Thank you. So maybe Walter, can you share the screen?
Thanks for the great talk, Tianchen. Can you see me in presentation mode? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. All right, so thanks for the invitation to discuss Tianchen and his co-authors' excellent work. So I'll take my 10 minutes and be to the point. As I wanted to just say, right, so a good paper raises many questions, as many good questions as it answers. So please, Tianchen and co-author, please see these questions as coming from that perspective. So my goal with raising these points and discussing a few things is to go back to the unanswered questions that Tianchen raised at the beginning. So, was a 30-minute window appropriate for assessing causal effects? What about a finer timescale? How quickly does a person begin responding to an intervention message? So when I first saw the 30-minute appropriate window, my first question I asked was, and I noticed that the work was focused on the minute level outcomes. Having worked with wearable data, my major concern is always the noise level in the granularity. So when I look at data coming in at the minute level, step count every minute is quite noisy. And so I had thought originally what would end up happening is an analysis where the actual main thing that varies is not looking at the longitudinal outcome at the minute level, but looking at different definitions of the outcome by choosing different deltas. So what I mean by that, and I try to quantify that here, is if you wanted to look at like the sum of the total number of steps in the next delta window, you would just take the sum of those, but you would analyze different choices of delta. So you might choose the 30 minutes as one, right? So the standard analysis that was run in HeartSteps, you had YIT delta for one particular delta, and you analyzed it for a fixed delta. I would think you would sort of extend it to allow for multiple choices of delta and analyze it as such. What this would allow you to do is sort of think of a cumulative effect, and you'd be analyzing the delta would sort of give you different cumulative totals. I'm curious when you know in the discussion to think about how this analysis maps to the minute level analysis. Is there a one-to-one correspondence? Is there a difference in what you get out? The other reason for doing this, and the reason I was suggesting it, and so I'm curious again what Tianchen and others think, is that the minute level analysis makes a lot of sense when you have continuous data, but the minute you move to binary outcomes, right? A lot of binary outcomes, I believe Tianchen has actually a paper on this. A lot of binary outcomes are actually a sequence of, you know, did something happen yet? And so you'll have a binary outcome of whether or not, say, you engaged with the app in the last bit of time. And so there, if you looked at minute level engagement, you'd have mostly zeros. And so defining like a cumulative outcome would make a lot of sense. So this is my first point I wanted to raise. My second point I wanted to raise was the separability of the effects. So I noticed in the marginal analysis is where it became a little bit clearer to me that you had an effect that was broken out by J and T. So you had an effect that sort of broke into two pieces and was additive in nature, one effect over the decision points, one effect within time. I'm curious if you know the extension to a two-dimensional sort of space would make a lot of sense, and would the conclusions that were at the end of Tianchen's talk be robust to those assumptions of additivity of those effects. I also noticed, and this is, again, I don't have a good answer, so I get to raise questions I don't have answers to in this part. When there's sort of moderators, I noticed that there's obviously a sort of a linearity in the moderator that we're still assuming, at least in the feature set, but that there's sort of not a really complicated interaction of JT and the S that was investigated, and I'm curious if there's thoughts on how to do that better. The other thing I'd like to raise, so one point I just wanted to spend a little bit more time on is, again, we're trying to find the best choice of delta for the future, and I see that Tianchen's results, right, they point to a 10 to 40 range, but I'm curious, right, that there's sort of what is this choice focused on? It's focused on sort of a signal to noise trade-off as far as I can tell. If you set delta too small, you're expecting there to be some effect, but in reality, you don't have much data, so you're seeing a small effect because of the amount of data you looked at, so you want to set delta larger. But if you set delta too large, you're basically swamping out all of the main effect you might see with a bunch of low signal information, sort of a small treatment effect. But this sort of suggested to me thinking about sort of a signal to noise measure in which you're trying to get the estimates that of beta, but then you're trying to understand those estimates of beta as a function of signal to noise. So the example I'm giving here, if you didn't have a time varying effect, so I'm going to make my life easy and assume that T doesn't matter, one could look at, for different choices of delta, you take the estimate that I was talking about in my first slide, which is for fixed delta, look at the outcome you would have built, the cumulative sum, you estimate beta T delta, and you look at a signal to noise. So if the effect really dissipates after, say, 30 minutes, then beta T delta squared, you're going to be adding a lot of zeros on the end. So you're just going to have a sort of a constant after some bit of time, but sigma T squared is going to increase. And so you'll sort of see a signal to noise measure that's going across delta. I'm curious if there's sort of a way to visualize and sort of give a more standardized measure to hand off to clinicians and collaborators. I think, you know, one of the hardest parts is when we go back to the collaborator is to say 10 to 40, but then they still have to pick a number for the next study, right? And so giving them the trade-offs in those choices, I think giving them a visualization of those trade-offs might make a lot of sense. My one concern with that is that often people will then go take those and do power calculations off of them. So I worry that, like, which you don't necessarily want to do. Gelman has a lot of work on the use of estimated effects on unstandardized effects to do power calculations. I don't want them to do that, but I want to give them a way to visualize this choice of delta and the trade-off. Let's see, I have about 4 minutes left. So I had 2 more points I wanted to make. And one point I wanted to make is exactly the one that Tianchen spent a long time on, which is a lot of discussion around this causal excursion effect is in the fact that it depends on the policy that you've implemented. One of the things when we talk about going from one study to another, so again, going back to Tianchen's unanswered questions, we're trying to pick a delta for a future study. That future study need not use the same policy that was used in the original study. So HeartSteps, I believe the randomization probability was constant at like 60% chance of sending a message, but we could imagine a world, and there is a new HeartSteps where the randomization probability is different. And so I think what one may want to ask is not what would have been the best choice of delta in this particular study, but what is the best choice moving forward, which means you have to think about the interaction with the policies that someone might be using in the future study. What that means is thinking a little bit about, and Tianchen and I saw each other last week, so we kind of talked about this, so I'm kind of priming him to sort of think a little bit out loud about this, of how to incorporate that policy that might be used in a future study in redefining the causal excursion effect and thinking about delta in that context. All right, I have 3 minutes. So I have 2 other comments. One is just that the second question was, how quickly does a person begin responding to an intervention message? And there it made me start thinking about an individual treatment effect, and we all know how difficult that can be to estimate. I know Tianchen has some work on bidirectional asymptotics. There are some other methods coming from conformal inference for individual treatment effects. I'm curious his thoughts on how to think about, should we be estimating an individual level response curve that's sort of an average for that person over time, and thinking about those as opposed to an average across people within a given time point? Will we actually get different conclusions when we look at those things? All right, my last slide, I want to give a shout out. I was at a talk last week, and so this is more, I'm curious about Tianchen and co-authors' thoughts on the following, which is, one of the things I struggle with when I'm talking about physical activity interventions is that a lot of economists and a lot of others will think of the sort of substitution effects, which is I walk now because you told me to, but if I look at the overall amount of steps being taken, they're actually roughly the same because of the fact that I've just substituted a walk I could have had later in the day for a walk that I'll do now. So there's sort of a substitution, which our treatment effect in these kind of MRTs doesn't pick up. One way to do that would be to think less about the immediacy of the effect and thinking more about the distribution of step count throughout the day. And these are sort of functionals in a different way because you're looking at sort of quantile effects. There's really interesting work by Srikar Kata, Harsh Parikh, Cynthia Rudin, and Alex Volvovsky on causal effects for wearables using distributional approaches. That being said, they really didn't consider the time-varying nature of an MRT. And so I do think there's an interesting intersection between those approaches and the ones that Tianchen talked about now. But with that, I'll stop and thank Tianchen for an excellent talk. I'm not sure, Tianchen, you can let me know if it's helpful for me to show you my questions one at a time or leave them up, but I will leave that up to you.
Thank you, Walter. Yeah, please leave them up, because this is so well-crafted a set of questions that I don't know the answers to, but I think I suppose that's great because there are more opportunities to do more interesting work and deeper work in this space. So I'll just briefly comment on the questions. So your first question is about minute level step count versus cumulative step count. And I never looked into this very carefully, but my hunch is that at least from the population level, these two should be equivalent. Now, in terms of the numerical results, in terms of modeling and analysis, then I would imagine this will lead to different results, and an additive model on the minute level may not translate to an additive model on the cumulative, let alone the choice of the splines. So it could be that by considering the cumulative, we get rid of the noise to some extent, or rather, increase the signal to noise ratio. That is possible, and we haven't looked into that. And for your other comment on binary outcome, then definitely it requires something different, and possibly modeling an event happening or something like that would be more meaningful than looking at the minute level thing. Then to your next comment on assuming additiveness, this is mainly a choice of convenience for us. And I think it's definitely worthwhile to look into the bivariate splines or some other methodology to get around this additive assumption. I would imagine one complication is that here, even when we're just looking at the additive model with the spline basis, we see some possible artifacts from these splines. So especially around the boundary. So when we have bivariate splines, I have been learning the non-parametrics literature, and my collaborator and student Jiaxing actually helped a lot in learning these herself and teaching me what these things work. But I would imagine with bivariate splines, with the amount of data we have, the noise would be even larger. For the third choice, the best choice of data, delta, actually, I would like to make a correction. So when I said effect window is 10 to 40 minutes, what I meant is that the window with a positive effect is between 10 to 40 minutes. So based off that, I would say just use 40 minutes as the cutoff. And in our paper, we actually did the analysis considering aggregate step count, 30-minute step count, 40-minute step count, and 60-minute step count, doing the standard micro-randomized trial analyses. And we see that the 40-minute yields the most significant causal effect. Well, but I completely agree with your concern that if we just based off everything on, which window is the most significant, and then guide the next study based on this, one, this seems problematic from a statistical perspective, and two, with a different different randomization probability, maybe the causal effect is different and the optimal window could be different. So this actually connects to your comment 4. Yeah, and so some kind of sensitivity analysis with different policies would be definitely helpful. And then for your Q5, how do we identify individual effects? This is very interesting. And I think that's ultimately what we want, both in terms of identifying and estimating the causal effects, but also building the intervention package to adapt to the difference across different individuals to be actually personalized. What I showed today is essentially covariate what should I say? Covariate specific causal effects. But at the end of the day, we want it to differ from person to person. So doing this kind of modeling, if the data permits, is definitely very interesting. I haven't looked into that. Yeah, and the conformal inference point is very interesting as well. And lastly, for the distributional alternative, actually, I was aware of some of the work in this space as well. And I was talking to Ian McKeague the other day, and he mentioned some of the distributional work he did also for physical activity, sensor-based data. And this, again, I would like to connect back to your first point about cumulative versus mid-level. And I would imagine non-parametrically, or rather on the population level, these things still translate back and forth, even though we're defining the causal effect on different scales. But numerically, things will be different. And another thing is, you also mentioned something very interesting about the substitution effect. So, ultimately, we want to influence the longer term outcome. Either how many steps you take during the study or across within the whole day, as opposed to just these 30-minute or 60-minute windows. So having some methodology to estimate that and potentially optimize the interventions based on these actual health outcomes that we care about would be very interesting. And I'm not aware of methods in this space. So maybe we should collaborate on all these.
Thank you, Tianchen. Sorry to interrupt, but I think time is up. So Thank you so much for both Tianchen for the great presentations and Jianxin for answering almost all the questions I think pop up. And still there's some questions I think left, but it's going to be transferred to the presenter. And thanks so much for the Walter for the discussion as well. So just let me conclude by sharing. We're going to have a different talk next week by Jared Murray about unifying weighting perspective on causal machine learning. So I hope like that many of you will come again to the talk next week as well. So thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.